Ronald Stein was a composer who came to Hollywood wanting to write for films and having no entree at all into the business. He just did it basically on a wing and a prayer.
Ronnie was in the service from 1951 to 1954. He was in special services, and he wrote several shows for the Army, and they traveled with those shows. When he knew he was going to be released, we decided to go to California, Hollywood, to write film music. So he wrote to every composer he knew, and nobody answered except Alfred Newman. And he wrote him this very stinging letter which said, "Don't bother to come, we already have too many composers." He began taking a record of a symphony that he had composed at Yale. And he began looking in Variety every day, in the Hollywood Reporter, and he took it to Roger Corman's office. Roger, he read in Variety, was going to make his first film for American International Pictures called Apache Woman. And the lady that was in the room there said, "Just leave the record." So he left it. And we didn't hear anything, and we were down to almost nothing. Ronnie looked at me and said, "Roger's going to call me tomorrow." I said, "He better." And he did. I mean, this was fortuitous. He knew it. And that's how Ronnie got his first score, and he was 25 years old.
The burgeoning AIP, they made films extremely cheaply in the 1950s, but they made films.
Everybody was very impressed with him. And of course, he was very cheap. He'd work for whatever they'd give him.
That's an extraordinary thing at the time, because you don't necessarily, you hire people by the picture, often by the week or by the day, and this relationship went on for 4 or 5 years. He was extremely prolific. I think in those 5 years he must have done 25 or 35 scores. There's this wide variety of films, a lot of which are remembered nowadays, some of which aren't, that Ron Stein did in the 50s and into the 60s. The science fiction and horror pictures, The She Creature, Underwater City for Columbia, which is a really neat score on a kind of a forgettable film, which is unfortunately a thread that runs through his work. 2 big budget, comparatively, Edgar Allan Poe films for Roger Corman, The Haunted Palace, which is really H.P. Lovecraft, and Premature Burial, which is this wonderful, huge score.
He worked later on Francis Ford Coppola's Dimension 13, which has got one of the greatest scores, I think, of any 60s horror film.
My favorite, actually, score of his is the Terror. It's just a swell score, and I managed to jam a few minutes of it into my first picture, Hollywood Boulevard.
Things like Drag Strip Girl and High School Hellcats and things like that are again, typical in that there's really no typical Ronald Stein score.
Dreams and moans and bats and bones and teenage monsters in haunted homes, a ghost on the stair, a vampire's bite, better beware, there's a full moon tonight.
I really love the music of Spider Baby.
By the time Spider Baby was made, Ronald Stein had written over 30 scores, maybe closer to 40, and his music, one way or the other, had appeared in something like 50, maybe 60 films, often uncredited. Late in the game, AIP would simply recycle his scores. By the mid-60s, the nice thing for Ron Stein was that the assignments that he was getting actually were more imaginative than grinding out yet another science fiction score or yet another Western score for AIP. And I know that he loved doing Spider Baby for that reason, for the same reason that he loved doing Dimension 13 for Francis Coppola. Number one, he was working with a friend, in this case Jack Hill, who he always liked.
I worked with Ronald Stein on the music. I knew Ronnie because he had done several pictures for Roger Corman. And so I showed him the rough cut of the movie and asked him if he'd want to do the score. And he just got really enthusiastic about it. He really wanted very badly to do it. And we really didn't, at that time, a low-budget picture, I mean, to get a composer and an orchestra to score a movie was just absolutely out of the question. But Ronnie said he would do it, and for $2,500, he wrote the score, went to Mexico and recorded it with an orchestra and brought us back the soundtrack.
They were doing a wacky, odd, independent picture. There was clearly an appeal there, because in that way, Jack was a kindred spirit. He wasn't a factory guy. He wasn't somebody that wanted to get into television and just grind out episode after episode every week and retire to Beverly Hills. He wanted to make films. Well, Ronald Stein wanted to make music for films. That dovetailed pretty well. That and the movie itself is so odd and wonderful and quirky. There was a great appeal there because it was a score unlike anything he'd ever done. So clearly he had a lot of fun. And that's apparent in not only watching the film, but listening to the score too.
He had this idea for doing a title song with Lon Chaney singing, and Lon said, "I'd love to do it." So we went to a recording studio, and I had a little bit of input into the lyrics, not much.
Cannibal spiders creep and crawl, and boys and ghouls having a ball. Frankenstein, Dracula, and even the mummy are sure to end up in somebody's tummy.
I don't know how many times in his life prior to that Lon Chaney had been asked to sing. Like once? No, like nonce. And he's just fine. He does, he kind of does this Rex Harrison sort of talky, singy. In fact, he really should have played Henry Higgins.
I was in the studio in the recording booth when Ronnie coaxed him through this. And he would say a few words, and Lone would say these words, and he'd say, "Am I saying it right? Is that right? Is that what you want?" And Ronnie kept saying, "Just do, this is how it's going to be, and this is the rhythm." And it took him hours, but he got it.
The lyrics perfectly match the rest of the score and the bouncy nature of them, in that they're fun and inventive and creepy. And Chaney's delivery is equally fun. It's like a big guy having fun scaring kids at Halloween.
In 1985, we moved back here to California, but Hollywood was not what it was. The people that he had worked with were long gone or dead, and those wonderful days of making films were gone. Ronnie was not one for doctors. He had wonderful insurance. He just thought the body heals itself. He was one of these people that just, I think men are more like that than women. And so he never went to a doctor. But in the middle of the night on July 13th, and I remember that date, he woke up in such horrible pain that he had to call a doctor. So he went in, and this was July the 15th, and they did the MRI, and we went to the doctor's office, and the doctor looked at us, and he looked at Ronnie, and he said, "Are you where you have cancer? It's in the last stages." And Ronnie just looked at him, never cried, never blinked. He said, "Tell me how much time I've got." Finally, on August the 12th, he got to the hospital at 11 o'clock in the morning, and he died at 5 o'clock in the evening. And that was just a month after he had been diagnosed. I think he really didn't want to live. We sang his music to him, and the rabbi was there, and that's how he died.
Ronnie Stein was a real genius. He was a great man.
I'm not sure how Ronald Stein stuff influenced people. It's unfortunate that, for a lot of reasons, that Ronald Stein's career was cut short, because it was. I think he was probably on the verge of breaking through with The Rain People, because The Rain People is just this wonderful, heartbreaking score. I think had he gone on for another 5 years or 10, because he wouldn't be that old now, his influence would be more obvious. There is, now maybe coincidentally, but whoever did the score for Dune, it's a nice score, beautiful score, and maybe it's entirely coincidental. However, the main theme from Dune is, note for note, the main theme from The Haunted Palace. It's unfortunate more people don't listen to stuff like this, because it's this wonderful body of work. Not just his, but a lot of composers that now are essentially unknown.
I think Ronnie's gift was that each score was different. Spider Baby was different than anything else he had ever done, and especially the title with Lon Chaney.
Over the last few years, what we've tried to do is to take the original masters that Harlene had when Ronnie died and transfer them to digital tape, just to make sure that they were there to preserve them. It's wonderful stuff. I mean, it's wonderful stuff now, and it's 40 and 50 years later. It's still going to be good 50 and 60 years from now.